Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of CSSPR's webinar series. I'm Abdul Waris Hameed, Research Associate at the Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research. In today's episode, we'll be discussing one of a kind of water sharing mechanisms in South Asia, the Indus Waters Treaty between Pakistan and India. This historical treaty, which has been held in abeyance by India recently, was signed in 1960, brokered by the World Bank. IWT divides Indus waters between India and Pakistan, giving eastern rivers to India and western rivers to Pakistan. IWT has been seen as a resilient mechanism that stood the test of time, including wars of 65, 71, conflicts like Kargil, and so many others, until recently, uh, following the Pahalgam attack in the Indian occupied Kashmir. India unilaterally held the treaty in abeyance. Now, what does that really mean, and what can really happen for Pakistan is an important question. People have been pondering over it. A lot of people have in Pakistan and elsewhere have been seeing it as weaponization of water. There are people who are seeing it as just an attempt to hide the shame of the intelligence failure in Pahalgam, and so on and so forth. But today we are going to discuss IWT in detail and the implications of this unilateral abeyance by India on Pakistan and on the region as well. Today, as we speak, it's been almost a week after the standoff between India and Pakistan, which actually followed the trajectory. Like Pahalgam happened, then treaty went into abeyance, then India started this attacking Pakistan's mainland. Pakistan retaliated, and then eventually a third party came in and mediated a ceasefire. And we are almost a week down the ceasefire. So discussing IWT and all of this in the context that I have just provided is really important for not only Pakistan, but for the region as well. And today to talk about IWT and its implications of India's decision on the region, we have Dr. Ahmad Ali Gul with us and Mubashar Rizvi with us. Dr. Ahmad has more than 13 years of experience in flood modeling, fluvial transport modeling, and spatial technology applications in disaster management. He holds a master's and a PhD degree in disaster management from Japan. Currently, Dr. Ahmed is heading the Center for Disaster Management at University of Management and Technology, Lahore. He also teaches at the School of Governance at UMT. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for joining. We also have Mubashar Rizvi with us. Mubashar is a researcher in international law and international security. He holds an MSc in Modern South Asian Studies from the University of Oxford and a postgraduate certificate in public international law with concentration on treaty law and law of the sea. His research emphasizes on smaller states. His research examines how smaller states navigate the intersection of realpolitik and international legal regimes to shape their strategic and foreign policy choices. So I'm grateful to both of you for joining us for today's session. I'll start with Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, before we go into the actual discussion of today, which is what will follow after this treaty is, unilaterally been put on hold. I would like you to, briefly give us your thoughts about this significance of IWT for the region, for India, for Pakistan, and over the years that since 1960, as it has seen a lot of ups and downs. How has it performed as per your opinion? Then a lot of views about it. Some say there are grievances on both sides actually. So how do you see IWT?
Thank you so much, Waris, for having me. It's always a pleasure, and it's really an interesting topic that we are here to talk about. I by no means consider myself an expert on IWT or on, let's say, regional transboundary issues, but we have had an opportunity to work on understanding the dynamics of um, uh, let's say, transboundary issues between India and Pakistan, more from a disastrous point of view, and sort of an early warning point of view, what kind of data sharing mechanisms exist, and what kind of issues stem from not sharing enough data or timely sharing of data. So from that perspective, I've been interested in IWT for maybe 10 years or so. So it's and recent developments, of course, have been quite alarming from the average Pakistani point of view. So it's of course a really important topic, and it's something that we always thought. We used to hear that next war is going to be on water, and the IWT is going to be the big flashpoint, and we always used to hear that, but I never really thought we would come to it. And partially it's because of what you just mentioned about IWT, withstood a lot of tensions in the past, and we never really thought that our neighbor would unilaterally hold it in abeyance or withdraw from it. So from that perspective, I think I personally subscribe to the point of view that um, the reason why it held on for so many years is because the treaty was uh, quite quite a bit in India's favor to begin with, and from the moment it was negotiated, it was already in India's favor, and they got not only the eastern rivers but a significant portion. I mean, a bit of not a significant, a bit of waters from the western rivers as well, and that was already there. That was their starting point. So it wasn't like we had negotiated much to begin with in 1960s. And I think I really understand the perspective of the Pakistani government back then, why generally you wanted to get this done, because they could foresee that there was a lot of leverage and from as a lower riparian, we always hear of the lower riparian anxiety, and that's a very real thing. We have seen it within the country, so we have really seen it as on an international level as well. So that's a real thing, and that lower riparian anxiety was what led to the Indus Water Treaty being signed, sort of, and being agreed to, not really on our terms. We didn't really push for our terms, and that's perhaps why I guess every time that some right-wing nationalists from the Indian side would try to convince the government not to do it, sorry, to sort of hold it in abeyance, there would some experts from their end would say, it's really already in our favor. You don't really need to do anything about it. So that's perhaps why it went on for so long. It survived the wars that we fought, 1965, 71, Kargil, and a lot of tensions since then. But now we see things changing on their side, and I I really think that it shouldn't have come to us shouldn't come to us as a surprise, because I think it was 2023 when we first formally received this, that they wanted to renegotiate it, and from our side we were really as since Modi's government started, we knew that this was going to happen. This conversation was really pressing, and we had to do something about it. So at this time, for Pakistan's policy circles, it's not really a big surprise, because it was 2 years in the coming, and Pahalgam perhaps was just an excuse. So I really think that we need to understand that we're not really as helpless as perhaps a lot of people are of the opinion that there's nothing we can do. So there's a lot of leverage. International law is in our favor, and I'm sure Mubashir is going to be talking about that as well. And as a lower riparian, I mean, if we really need to think that the law is in our favor, and we need to approach the let's say international courts or mediation mechanisms to talk about this. So looking forward to that kind of a discussion.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for setting the tone. And as you said, India approached Pakistan in 2023. I think it was February when they first served us a notice to revisit the Indus Waters Treaty, and then it was again in September 2024, probably August or September 2024.
Yeah.
And then Pakistan at both times gave a very diplomatic reply that this should be discussed in the Indus Water Commission, the permanent among the permanent commissioners. And then, obviously, as you said, the Pahalgam came as an excuse, maybe. But holding a treaty which has been brokered by the World Bank into abeyance, I'll go to Mubashir for that. What does the term really mean in international law, Mubashir? Like, can a treaty which has been brokered by an international organization between the two countries, can it be unilaterally? Abeyance really means to put on temporary hold. How does that fit in international law, and how do you see it?
Thank you, Waris, and thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for setting the stage so well. Before I get to your question, I would just like to add one more thing to what Dr. Ahmed said about how India is trying to frame this issue in the context of the Pahalgam incident. And as both of you mentioned that in 2023 they formally notified us of their intention to revisit the Indus Waters Treaty. I would just also like to add, I think on the whole, this is a very strategic and calculated move from the Indians. If you go back to, I think, 2003, or somewhere around that time, the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly passed a resolution requiring a very urgent review of the IWT. After the Uri attack, Prime Minister Modi said that blood and water cannot flow together. So, they are trying to frame this in the context of Pahalgam, but I think it's very calculated. They are aware that Pakistan is facing, deep political and institutional discontent at this point in time. So, from the perspective of your opponent, it seems like it's a very calculated move. With regards to your question about abeyance, so I think whether or not an external organization brokered it, the fact is, it's just so there's been a lot of argument from Indian commentators that they've not suspended the treaty, they're holding it in abeyance, but I think that's essentially something which is purely rhetorical. In treaty practice, abeyance is just another way of describing suspension, that okay, the treaty still remains in force, but the operation is paused. So regardless of what label India chooses, international law would still ask them the same question about whether they are meeting the requirements to whether they are meeting the legal requirements to suspend the treaty or not. Now, this is where the law comes in, and once we go into more details, I can share what kind of provisions India seems to be implicitly or explicitly relying on, and then what are the weaknesses in their clause and what options Pakistan has.
Right, and we have heard the World Bank president also say publicly that India can't really do it. But again, you recently wrote a piece about it as well. Like there are several options for Pakistan to as Dr. Ahmed was also pointing out, that international law might favor us. But there has to be some procedures and some ways to use international law to our favor as well. Can you briefly talk about that as well before I go back to Dr. Ahmed and to actually learn that can the waters be stopped?
Sure. So to understand what options Pakistan might have, I think it's important to first understand how India is framing this from a legal perspective. Now, there's many different ways. And for while I don't want to go into too many technical legalities, but it's just broadly speaking, India is trying to frame this entire episode as in terms of violation of specific articles of the law of treaties. So, for example, there's an argument that Article 60 of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties allows India to suspend a treaty or hold it in abeyance, as they are arguing, if the party violates provision which is essential to its purpose, right? So this is called the material breach provision. So India argues that Pakistan's support of terrorism constitutes a material breach, which allows them to, which undermines the spirit of cooperation and allows them to take this step. Now, the problem is the treaty itself. Indus Water Treaty is a water sharing treaty. It's not a cross-border terrorism treaty. So the treaty does not require peaceful relations or good faith as a condition. So the text of the treaty is very specific. It focuses on very narrowly on water allocation and technical cooperation. And India hasn't claimed that Pakistan has violated any specific provision of the treaty itself. Only that that according to their claim, that the broader conduct of Pakistan, makes cooperation unsustainable. And that, while that might be, enough for domestic political rhetoric or, for any strategic objectives, that does not satisfy international legal objectives. Similarly, Indians have been arguing that since 1960, since 1960, and when the Indus Water Treaty was negotiated, there's been a fundamental change of circumstances, and a lot of arguments are made with regards to climate change, demographic pressures, and whatnot. And again, while this may be, good for their own rhetoric, the problem is these changes are not unique to India. We are in the same region. The climate change and demographic stresses that they're facing, we are facing them as well. So they affect both the states, and international law demands a much higher threshold. That the changes that you are arguing should be such that the continuation of the treaty becomes untenable, and that's a standard that's very high. And legally speaking, experts are of the opinion that India is unlikely to meet them. Even Indian experts, some of India's most respected voices in international law, have said that it's very difficult for India to argue a case based on Article 60 or 62 of the Vienna Convention, and they instead have argued that India should have more of a lawfare approach and then try to weaponize this whole issue. But purely speaking, in legal terms, this is not something that they're able to justify. And even it's very important for everyone who's watching to understand. Even if, let's suppose, India was to say, okay, we do not follow the treaty, right? We will. I mean, essentially, in international law, you cannot force any state to act in a certain way. The treaty does bind you, but as we've been seeing from the ongoing Gaza, the conflict in Gaza, strong states can do what they want to do. But let's suppose the Indus Water Treaty, does not exist from tomorrow. Can India go ahead and do whatever it wants? No, because in international law, other than treaty law, there is also something which is called customary international law. So, which is like a custom that all states are expected to follow. And even in cases where some parts of law are not in treaties, states are still expected to follow them. So if we look at the examples of customary international law with regards to river sharing, we see many examples where there are not where there are not no specific treaties that between upper riparians and lower riparians. There are still cases where water sharing is done. And then finally, the biggest issue, there is no exit clause in the IWT, which I think is the biggest failure in India's argument, because the treaty doesn't, because everything that I've told you right now is like is a response to India's possible legal rationales. But the IWT does not have any exit clause. It does not allow for unilateral suspension or termination. So both parties have to agree to it. And which is why, based on all of this, it's a very weak argument from the Indian side.
Right. Thank you so much, Mubashir, for that detailed insight. Coming back to Dr. Ahmed, as Mubashir said, let's, for example, hypothetically suppose that Indus water does not exist from tomorrow. The water flows does exist. You can't really get them going away in a day. So what hydrologically, and as a expert in water resource management, would you explain us how will it happen that India, what are the possible things India can do? Because we have been going through a lot of literature that has been coming out, sharing with you as well. You also giving your insights at different point in times. Can India, especially the Western rivers, can India divert them all as the fear has been in Pakistan? And then there's also another side in Pakistan's, I'll say Pakistan's meme analysis, where they say that, when the floods will come, India would have to let the water go, so they can't really, make their wish work. So what do you think is actually going to happen, and how is it going to happen?
Here, a lot of sane analysis on this point has been, let's say, revolving around the fact that right now they don't have a lot of storage on these Western rivers. And in the absence of that, I mean, it's not really easy to construct large storage dams on a river, and it's something which happens perhaps on a 5 to 10 year scale. So we don't really expect that to happen overnight. If India intends to do that, and that, of course, will be contested by Pakistan, but if they do succeed, it's going to take 5 to 10 years for that to shape up. And right now, there has been, I mean, since 1970s, there have been constructions happening on the Western rivers, and Salal, Baglehar, Kishan Ganga, All of these structures were constructed, but most of these are run-of-the-river projects. And run-of-the-river projects are they take less effort perhaps to construct. I mean, in terms of construction time, they require less time to construct. Their storage capacity is less, but as we have seen, apparently their uh, nuisance capacity does exist, and India has been exercising that to the fullest extent since the past 2 weeks or so. So we, of course, that's something which I'm sure is a red line for a lot of people in Pakistan. No storage reservoirs on the Western rivers. But apart from that, one of the other issues from purely from structural point of view, we would not like to see any kind of an interbasin water transfer as well. There have been attempts in the past, and there has been some of that linked with the existing structures, but as that has been minimal. So let's say if from an engineering point of view, it is possible. It may not be economically feasible, but let's say if it really boils down to their will, but if they want, they can try to attempt some kind of interbasin um, water transfer project, large scale project, which could divert the flows. And from the face value of such projects, it seems like the water that they are diverting may not be much, but it when we look at these things, especially when we look at when we analyze any new existing or new run-of-the-river project as well, we look at its ability to influence when it's sort of in the worst case scenarios when the flows are at their lowest. So in when the glacial melt is low and there is no rains happening, that's when the rivers are nearly dry, and that's the base flow which we are really concerned about. And that if the upper riparian has a way to divert that water or to stop it flowing altogether, stop even the environmental flows, that's something that's really worrisome for the lower riparian states. So those kind of efforts would, of course, be really something that Pakistan would be worried about. There are other efforts that they're currently recently announced. There's already a canal that is taken out from upstream of Akhnur on Chenab River, and they're planning to extend that canal, I think, by 120 kilometers or something. So that of course means that they're going to increase the canal command area and divert more water to their own areas before it enters Pakistan. So all of such options perhaps are available to them. But apart from these, uh, I think we also discussed previously before having this conversation, we discussed that there's not a lot of possibility to divert the flows for irrigation because, frankly, in the catchment areas of the western rivers, they don't really have a lot of farmland to irrigate. So there's not a lot of possibility for diversion for irrigation purposes. So if there is a possibility of constructing storage reservoirs, they would and they would store the water, but eventually, yes, they would be they would have to release it because there's no other utilization of water on their end. So again, like I said, it serves a nuisance value similar to what they have been exercising recently.
Yeah, but as you pointed out, more than India's uh, incapacity of not being able to store water, especially during the summers when the flows are really high. Do you see a problem for Pakistan in the dry season when, as you have mentioned, that this is where Pakistan's concern might lie, or do you think that this might be a problem actually?
It's a serious, legitimate issue, to be honest. I mean, especially when it comes to water diversion, and also when it comes to the ability to, because let's say if your upper riparian has the ability to stop or attenuate the flow of water, that that seems fine when you're getting enough water. But when let's say if you're getting 200,000 cusics downstream of Chenab and somebody's diverting 100, let's say 1,000 cusecs off into a canal, that's fine for us. That's okay. We can live with that. But if all the flow that we are getting is like 20,000 cusecs and or 10,000 cusecs, and somebody's taking 1/10 of it, and we have our own farmers begging for water, so that's not a good situation. That's something that nobody would accept in Pakistan, and especially, I mean, these things they're not really short term. So it's not like just a one-off thing. It's something that we'll have to live with um, as our population increase, as climate change makes water availability even more unpredictable, and our glacial stores and our snow, let's say seasonal snow diminishes. That's going to make it even more difficult in the future. So anything um, that we accept would have to factor in those calculations as well.
Right. Mubashir, I'll come back to you, given what Dr. Ahmed has said and given what you have said already, that obviously international law, there's no policing for international law. It's, mostly voluntarily states accepting what they have to do under the provisions. So, as Dr. Ahmed was saying, especially in the dry spells, and as he said that, diversions can threaten Pakistan's agriculture big time. What do you think? And this, I don't want an answer from the international law student. I want an answer for the international security student. That how do you see what realpolitik options will Pakistan have? Would Pakistan just take the case to the court, or would Pakistan, try to engage diplomatically, bringing in other stakeholders, or something else?
It's very interesting, and I think even my strategic lens response would you know borrow something from the legal domain. So strictly speaking, if let's suppose India was to stop water tomorrow, what can we do short of using force to force them? Nothing, right? So then what options do you have? Someone would say that okay, we can look to the treaty mechanism itself for the IWT, but in this scenario the IWT no longer exists. With a lot of issues between India and Pakistan, many people say, oh, we can just take them to court. We can just go to the ICJ. The problem is, one, because of Shimla, we've said we'll solve our issues bilaterally. And the other main thing about the ICJ is, you can, in a domestic court, you can take any other party to the court in the domestic system. When it comes to the ICJ, both parties have to agree beforehand that we will obey the court's jurisdiction. So it's not as if we just go to the ICJ or any other mechanism and say, oh, we are bringing this case to you. They have to agree, unless there is something specifically within the treaty that you're trying to debate, which says like, okay, if this doesn't happen, you can go to this forum. We can seek international arbitration. We've done this before. I think in 1971 there was a case of aerial overflights. We've done that. We can hypothetically go to raise this issue at the Security Council, but with anything to do with the Security Council is highly politicized. So something goes there, it's probably going to get vetoed from like one partner or the other. So I think, very realistically speaking, it's probably going to come down to the way we saw this recent conflict being resolved: third party mediation, someone pushing both sides to sit at the table and resolving the issue. Yeah, but realistic short of going to a conflict, which I think neither party can afford, and I think specifically from Pakistan's perspective, not regardless of how well we were able to repel the Indians with what happened in just a week or so ago, I think that's not really a realistic option for us. We don't want to be doing that. I think with regards to the issue at hand, I think diplomatic favor and everything else is in our side, because it's not something that you're saying, oh, we don't want to do trade with you, we don't want to do something else with you. It's a river channel, and I think if you look at all other examples in the world, river sharing is done in a very proper and equitable way. So not necessarily equitable, but there you have to do it. There's no bypassing it. So I don't know if I really answered your question.
No, I get your, the struggles we are all having to actually formulate a proper answer to that. I think it will take some time maybe for all of us to actually formulate an answer to that. But coming to another part of it, that you said that third party can come in, but then again, Shimla is there, which Pakistan, by the way, said that might not work as in response to India's abeyance of Indus Waters Treaty. But really, we can't really say for sure that how is this is going to play. But one thing that I think that comes into India's way is India's ambition to be part of the superpower club. So, how can a regional hegemon, a superpower, actually, become a member of that club? How can India become a member of that club with it not following the international law? So, do you think that would India's own dream would compel itself to abide by the law?
I think I would frame it the other way around. Their dream of becoming a hegemon gives them the idea that they don't have to follow the law. If you look at all hegemons, they are not necessarily following the law. The US has this phrase, I think it was John Bolton a few years back, who said that, oh, something along the lines of US exceptionalism to international law. It doesn't apply to us. And we've seen that play out in the recent conflict. Anytime someone tries to bring in international law with regards to the ongoing crisis in Palestine and Gaza, they just say, okay, we can just cover everything. Just yesterday, I think there was news that they sanctioned the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor, and even their email account has been suspended because Microsoft, their provider was Microsoft, and their cloud storage and everything is gone. So I think when you become a hegemon, you have the capacity to ignore international law. We've seen the case with China in their arbitration issue with the Philippines in the South China Sea. That they said, okay, we just won't listen to the decision. I think the fact that India is not a hegemon right now plays more to our advantage, because if they were to get to that position, then there's no way to compel them. That's why you are the hegemon. You're the biggest bully in the playground. No one can compel you to do anything. But since they are not that big nor a bully completely, they try to be one. I think this is why we can ask other stronger players. And because one more thing to understand in this context is when people talk about India being a regional hegemon, it's like they conveniently discard that just north of India there's China. You cannot talk about South Asia, or you cannot talk about this region without talking about China. And as long China surpasses India in every metric. If you, I've been speaking to a lot of Indians about this, this phrase we hear from Indians a lot, which they used to justify themselves as being, an aspiring great power or middle power, that, oh, we are the fifth largest economy in the world, or we have like a 5 trillion or something economy. But when we speak to Indians, a lot of that, it's great for them to surpass a country like the UK, but the UK is, I think, less than 100 million people. When you, look at their reported figures to a population of, over half 1.5 billion or something, they're not really that strong. And a lot of Indians do complain a lot about issues of economic disparity in the country, and these are issues which are not necessarily present in China, or if they are not present to that extent. So with such a powerful neighbor to your north, I would, if I was India, I wouldn't put my hegemonic aspirations, I would tone them down a little bit. And since they are not in that position, I don't think they can really do whatever they want. We've seen even in Kashmir, they try to bully us, but we've seen the limits of their power when it comes to standing up to China.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for bringing in China, because Dr. Ahmed, as you were saying, as we were talking about the interbasin transfer of water, it's simply not one river, it's a whole basin and then connected to another basin. And, they share an ecology, a diverse ecosystem that forms. And it's simply not just water, it's a whole biodiverse environment that is dependent on the flows of these rivers. And obviously, China being in the north, a lot of rivers that come to Nepal that eventually go to India originate from China. So, on both points, I want you to talk about this impact. Let's say if what India is trying to do, it starts happening, it would have ecological impacts for the whole region, for the other basins as well. And then, what if China comes into picture, and what possibility and what don't want to use the word power, but what potential do you think China has to influence this?
I think it's an interesting point because there are a few things at play here. Before this whole episode of holding identity and abeyance, there's a lot of because I used to hear a lot of discussion on, especially around flood season. I used to say, we hear a lot of interesting stuff on the news. Oh, India ne pani chhod diya. They released water, and oh, Pakistan's going to be flooded, and they weaponize water, and they do that. And I used to say they're not crazy. They like their water. They know how to use it productively, and they're not going to just use it for nuisance value, for destroying, disrupting us just for the sake of it. And they're pretty rational in their use. They maximize its utility on their end, and if it exceeds their storages, or it exceeds their capacity, then that's only when they release it. And since we were under IWT, we knew that they would tell us in advance, and we'd be able to make some arrangements to that effect. So with that said, I mean, recently, this whole episode of them actually weaponizing water, uh, it does, I mean, and unilaterally um holding IWT in abeyance, it does set a sort of a dangerous precedence in the region. And it's something that I'm sure Indians would have thought about or have placed it in their calculus, because um, it's something similar happening in Brahmaputra River. China is the upper riparian, and the water going all the way to Jamuna, I mean Brahmaputra going through Bangladesh. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really set that kind of a precedence, something really outlandish, because then they lose their own uh, moral ground when it comes to issues on that side. So, but there's one more issue. I mean, when you talk about the Indus Water Treaty is between India and Pakistan, right? Although the Indus Water basin is extending to China, also to Afghanistan. So, I mean, it was just between two countries. So, right now, I think it would be also interesting if Pakistan starts to involve China into discussions that, okay, this Indus water basin is not just us, it's other people as well. So how does China view it? And I'm sure those kind of discussions may already be underplay. But I'm also interested to see what Mubashir has to say about setting a dangerous precedent in the neighborhood.
Yeah, Mubashir, as uh, Dr. Ahmed was talking about the dangerous precedent, there are a lot of treaties, other treaties apart from IWT or agreements. For example, between Nepal and India, they have two agreements and a treaty. And between India and Bangladesh, they have a treaty on the Ganga River and only one, reservoir. I think the Farakka Dam, which comes under that treaty. And with Nepal, they have two working agreements and one treaty, Mahakali, which was designed but still has not actually started working since 1996. This precedent that India has set, and especially Nepal being the upper riparian and then China being the super upper riparian, and you have talked about China in the equation. How do you see this precedent? Can this impact? And let's talk regionally. Let's not talk about Pakistan, but this can disrupt region's peace and stability if the water wars actually start.
Yeah, so I'll quickly borrow from the previous question you asked, and I know I said that a hegemon does not necessarily, or a regional aspiring regional power does not necessarily follow the rules. But I think, like you said, there's significant literature on this as well. To get to that point, you have to show that you are playing by the rules, and then you get above them. The issue with India is, in coming to this question, they have certain expectations on one issue, or with regards to one party, and then a completely different stance with regards to the other party, right? And this essentially weakens their case a lot of times. So there is there is a kind of a military exercise called a freedom of navigation operation. So India very strongly opposes it. Back in 2023, April of 23, the US, some US warships passed across the along the Indian coastline, and Indians objected. They said it's a violation of our domestic law and international law. And when you're saying one thing, you also have to, when you're objecting to something, you also have to make sure you're not doing it. And at the same time, we know India was stationing its submarines in Pakistan's coastal waters. So this kind of discrepancy in their stance and their behavior with different countries, it kind of shows that India is not necessarily willing to play by the book, and this is what will have regional implications. And why I'm giving you this background is, with regards to the Indus Water Treaty, India claims that the material circumstances have changed, climate change and whatnot, etc. But when you look at the water sharing treaty between India and Bangladesh, the opposite is true. Bangladesh actually claims that because one thing India was, I think they learned their lessons from the IWT, that they because the IWT does not have an exit clause, it does not have a time bar, it's an indefinite treaty. The other treaties it has, they are not they do not go on indefinitely. So, for example, the treaty with Bangladesh, which was signed in 1996, it's a 30-year treaty, and it actually is these. Yeah, and they are renegotiating it. And one of Bangladesh's claims is that a lot of the provisions for that treaty were made based on historical data. A lot of changes have happened recently. Bangladesh, like Pakistan, is one of the countries most susceptible to issues of climate change. And Bangladesh has said a lot of things have changed, so they have significant reservations. So while India is willing to apply the climate change framework to make a basis for renegotiating the Indus Water Treaty, they are not necessarily willing or open to giving Bangladesh the same leeway when it comes to the renegotiation of the treaty, which is happening as we speak, and because the current treaty is set to expire in 2026. So that is one thing. The other thing is, Bangladesh does not necessarily have the military capacity of Pakistan. Now, I don't mean to portray Pakistan as a military superpower, but at the same time, we have certain options that Bangladesh doesn't. And when you have those options, you can push things in a direction which, might force India, as willing as it may be, to the discussion table. Bangladesh cannot do that. Nepal certainly cannot do that. So their actions are not necessarily, not only dangerous and unprecedented with regards to Pakistan, but they have the capacity to upset the entire regional. There isn't really a balance, but completely disrupt how the region is operating. And with you do see India is oversized in this region, in terms of its land, in terms of its economic capacity, in terms of its military capacity. So it does set a very, very dangerous precedent. And I think this is where Pakistan must, like Dr. Ahmed said, that must engage China, must engage other powers that okay, forget us, forget Pakistan. Okay, for the broader regional security and the broader peace in the region, something has to be done, and India should not set a precedent where it can just unilaterally suspend everyone's water sharing agreements.
Right, and again, I'll reinforce that role of China, because Nepal and India have a working mechanism, and it's older than IWT. So the Kosi or the Gandak were designed before even IWT was there. Yet Nepal has been really, has its own grievances on its water equity, the kind of water it was supposed to get, the kind of water it is getting, because India is, controlling the reservoirs there. But then China comes into picture. If China comes into picture in Nepal, let's say, that could disrupt a lot for the region. Mubashir?
Oh, sorry, I thought Dr. Ahmed. Okay. Yes, it does, but it's interesting. China's way of doing politics is also very different to how the US or other countries do it. So you're right, it would be very interesting. And I think just like countries would, because of, if nothing else, purely because of security constraints, dimensions, want to side with India over Pakistan, then they would definitely want to side with China over India as well. China has, like I've said before, China's capacity to help these countries so much more than what India has. Now there's debates on how China goes about doing this and the Chinese debt threats and whatnot, but that's besides the point. So I think that would completely, change the dimension if China does choose to get involved, and perhaps because China at some level doesn't want India to rise, so that it can essentially, question and challenge China's dominance in the region. So we might, perhaps see it being involved in some case. The kind of narrative that's coming out of China in the context of the recent India-Pakistan conflict. There was an image of, this is so much disinformation going on. You can't really be sure if an image is accurate or not. But there was an image of a Chinese Air Force plane with, the number of kills that their J-10 has done doing the rounds. There's a lot of noise in Chinese digital ecosystem about how China has dominated India. So they're not. I don't think they're doing it out of love for Pakistan. This is just like how China wants to. Does not want to see India rise as a competitor in its region. There's a lot of theory in this, like when you want to become a regional superpower, you have to make sure no other country is bothering you. The US is a regional power in North America. China is a competitor, and China, purely for those reasons, would not be comfortable in India getting to that position. And perhaps this is why I see a lot of potential for China to come in and, as like you said, disrupt India's ambitions as far as this specific topic or any other issue is concerned.
Right, Dr. Ahmed, Pakistan's Indus problem is not only because of India. There's another, emerging issue, which is the Kabul River. And Afghanistan has shown at different instances that they want to have, build dams on Kabul or Kunar, and that would impact the flows to the Indus. And Pakistan is again the lower riparian in that case. And can you please help us understand the problem in that context, Pakistan's situation?
I think if I'm not wrong, in Kabul River Basin, Pakistan is both the upper and the lower riparian. So in the case of Kabul River, some of the tributaries originate from Chitral side, go into Afghanistan, then come back into flow back into Pakistan. So yeah, it's a bit of yeah, it's a similar situation. Again, any structure on Kabul River is going to disrupt flows for us. Um, um, let's say a win-win situation could be that we allow them to construct run-of-the-river projects where where they may have some limited storage capacity, but at the same time it would allow them to generate electricity, which I'm sure they'd be very much interested in. So that does create that sort of but to be honest, I think since the Kabul River's ratio of flows into the Indus River is not as significant as Chenab and Jhelum River. So we might really try to play a more diplomatic hand and try to sort of find a win-win situation, because frankly, these kind of issues have to be discussed at the diplomatic level. That it's more of a political issue and something that you can sit at a table and discuss if you're willing to do so. And you can easily, not look at that problem as a zero-sum game, but rather sort of find a balance for all the stakeholders. So I think we should be able to find a solution which is acceptable to everybody. But then again, it also depends on the increasing overtures and a lot of love happening between India and Afghanistan recently, especially in the aftermath of Pahalgam and this Operation Sindoor. So yeah, we need to. I mean, we also saw that India was actively supporting construction of dams in Afghanistan, and that's possibly also knowing the fact that any construction of dams on Kabul River tributaries would be opposed to Pakistan's interests. So I think that's something that we need to both keep an eye on and also sort of treat very diplomatically, because we shouldn't really outright uh, antagonize another neighbor on water issues when we can try to be um, sort of set a precedence on how to resolve water issues more diplomatically. That could be good.
Right. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of our today's webinar. And before we actually end it, I would want final words from both of you. But Dr. Ahmed, if you remember in September when India served us notice in 2024, I was discussing with you that, what are the possible options that Pakistan can, opt for that. And you are of the opinion that Pakistan should not really engage on this and let it be settled in the commission and not, go on the table. And I was of the opinion maybe that this opens an opportunity of dialogue between both countries. So maybe we should take it. But you had your reasons, and one of them was Pakistan's bargaining power. Hypothetically, if we again get a chance, and as Mubashir said, maybe a third party comes in, World Bank comes in and says, okay, sit and talk again. What would be Pakistan's bargaining position this time, and how do you see Pakistan can, act?
That's an interesting question. So back then, when we had this discussion, my opinion was that if we stay within the mechanisms which are formulated under the treaty, we use the Indus Water Commissioner Forum to discuss these issues, we would still frame it within the treaty, and then we wouldn't allow significant deviations from that. And that mechanism was still, I think, something that Pakistan would be more comfortable with. And now the situation, I mean, right now, I'm not sure what would be the framing of the discussion, at which forum we're going to have that discussion. That's what Mubashir was also mentioning. So that really depends on which forum we talk about it now. But I think one, it's to realize the fact that this is something which Pakistan considers, you know, a national security issue, right? So so if things go south, the bottom line is pretty horrific, right? So we are both nuclear armed nations, so it can go bad really fast, and so we really need to see that is the worst case scenario. So how can we really achieve something which is better than that? So I really think something that Mubashir mentioned really struck me. That I also agree that third-party mediation could be the best way forward. And but I think before that happens, we have to set the stage for it by making a better case at the international stage. And a lot of, internationally, lower riparian rights are considered from a sympathetic lens. And that's something, I mean, India's case is pretty weak in those terms. Nobody would see um, one upper riparian unilaterally trying to stop water, punishing the the lower riparian for something completely, absurd, like framing it on terrorism and other grounds. So that's a pretty weak argument, and I'm sure a lot of other countries would see it from that lens. But at the same time, a lot of diplomatic effort would be required to expect third-party mediation to be in our favor. And possibly, I mean, you guys are IR people, and you guys would see it from a more nuanced lens. But I see in the time when we see might is right happening across the world, I think it's not a it's a bit of a dangerous time to be a small country. But at the same time, I think uh, recent events have also uh, shown, we shouldn't really be allowed to push other people, to be pushed around by other people. So the stance should be, A, build our case diplomatically, allow for third-party mediation, uh, some signaling with the help of third-party mediators, possibly the US, possibly China would be best, especially the case that we discussed. That there's Brahmaputra River where in which China is the upper riparian, India and Bangladesh being the lower riparian. I really think that uh, India would be treading on uh, you know dangerous waters if they ignore that aspect, and they wouldn't really want to do something outrageous there.
Right. So, and again, I'm really sorry. Before we come to the end of it, I have another question that I really want an answer to. I hope you guys, since you guys are here, so I would want at least an opinion on that. There has been a model on Mekong River where the low riparians on the Mekong River, bullied by China somehow, formed a Mekong River Commission, and US played a part in it, setting up that commission and everything, maybe as a US tactic to support countries who have grievances against China to gain support in the region. And as we were saying, Pakistan has the low riparian grievances from India. Bangladesh has, at some points, I feel their grievances are much more than our grievances because their problem is actually very big. So they have grievances. And then if China wants to downplay India, can China help these two countries form a diplomatic alliance to pursue a case somewhere on the international forums? Is that a far-fetched possibility, a diplomatic alliance of low riparians in the region?
I just remembered a very interesting point that it's related to what you mentioned. I just remember that India has been bullying and Bangladesh and stonewalling their Ganges Barrage project for quite some time. And then Sheikh Hasina's government, which was quite close to Indian interests, they allowed that to happen, and that did make a lot of people in Bangladesh very upset because it was something which was promising water security and development in Bangladesh, but they had to scrap it and allow it to get stonewalled because of Indian pressure. So they have been, bullying not just Pakistan, but a lot more neighbors in terms of water. So, but at the same time, as you mentioned, I don't really see it. It sounds to me it's not really China's style to make a group or sort of a lobby. But I guess I'll be looking forward to Mubashir's remarks on this.
Mubashir.
I mean, the logic still holds that you cannot really pursue a case in any court until the other party is willing to become part of the that as well. But the idea itself is it's very thought provoking. I think I'll borrow what Dr. Ahmed said earlier about active diplomacy. Whether it's the IWT issue, whether it's Pahalgam, whether it's Operation Sindoor, I think one of my biggest grievances with the Pakistani style of doing things is we are very reactive. We are not proactive. Even with the IWT issue, we are using the law as a mechanism for protest, not as as a tool for pressure. So what I mean by this is Bangladesh and Pakistan can come together. They can use law. They can use they can use treaty provisions. They can use diplomacy to make a case for themselves on the global stage. As Dr. Ahmed said, there would be very little sympathy for India as the upper riparian in this case. Say that they can unilaterally do whatever they want. But having said that, I think India also recognizes, specifically in the context of the IWT, they cannot, with Pakistan, they cannot do whatever they want. Pakistan is not Nepal. Pakistan is not Bangladesh. Even if everything is going wrong in Pakistan, we still have, the big red button no one should be talking about. So I think we've seen in the worst of times, there's been quite back-channel diplomacy. I think we need to see more of that happening in the IWT as well, with the IWT as well. And this has happened in the past. Maybe now, whether that happens through reactivation of the commission, whether that's through data sharing or whatnot. I'm not that good on the technical aspect, but something has to happen between the two countries. And what we should also understand is the current moment we are in. There are very significant domestic pressures both in India and Pakistan. From the Indian side, the despite the Modi government's efforts to filter all kind of information, and even with all their claims of striking into Pakistan, they're facing a significant backlash. They contrary to their narrative, they've not destroyed the Lahore port. I would want to visit that port one day, but the narrative of the downed Indian plains is resonating a lot in India. So they are significant electoral challenges, but at the same time there are challenges in Pakistan as well. And because with whether that's regards to political unrest, institutional chaos, disruption, whatnot. So we have to understand some changes might be politically necessary. We perhaps are in a moment that it might not be able, possible to preserve the Indus Water Treaty as it is. If both sides realize that that is the case, then perhaps we can have some limited and mutually agreed amendments. So which it's because essentially both sides want to be seen as winners in front of their domestic audiences. So and then they can walk away and say, okay, we've done this, they've done this. This is why we're. The Indians can claim to have won. The Pakistanis can claim the same as well. But then that would then avoid the unilateral disruption, but also make sure that peace in the region is preserved as well. But going back to your point, I don't think both Bangladesh and Pakistan can take India to court together.
No, I
But
was
I
not
do
actually saying
think
the quote, but forming a diplomatic pressure, maybe
I
getting
think
them together.
I think diplomatic pressure is very important, and I think Bangladesh is so. Even aside from India, in international forums, Bangladesh is pushing pressure. So there was a recent last year there was an advisory opinion with regards to the law of the sea. Bangladesh used its position as one of the most affected countries by climate change, and they gave their submissions. Like I said earlier, my issue with Pakistan is we are very reactive. We are not proactive. Other countries, when you see their approach, they see something they like Dr. Ahmed said in the beginning, a lot of people in Pakistan's policy space had, they saw this coming. Some sooner or later this would happen. Now the question is, if you see that a country that has such aspirations, they have a government which wants to they have this great grand idea of whatever expansionist vision of India they want to have imposed on the world map, then you should be despite everything else that's going on, you should be acting very, very proactively, whether that's with regards to third party mediation, whether that's regards to diplomatic pressure, legal pressure. We should be doing that more proactively, not, and like I said, not just using law as a tool of protest, but also as a tool of pressure.
Right. Thank you so much, Mubashir, for such detailed answer. Before we end the session, I know both of you have been in different places where you have been asked for different consultancies regarding international law and water resource management. So one final word by both of you: how should Pakistan work this forward? What should be the next steps that Pakistan should take from, let's say, tomorrow, working towards restoring what has been lost? Dr. Ahmed?
Okay, I think I can go first. I think we have gone through it, so I'll just attempt to summarize the key points forward. I think the diplomatic channels, building the diplomatic pressure, then we should be looking at third-party mediation for sure. That said, I mean, we discussed it in detail, but I think um, yeah, I think just building the pressure won't really, let's say, sorry, my mind's gone towards.
I'll take Mubashir on this, then I'll
Yeah.
come back to you.
Yeah, just give me a second.
Sure. So my recommendation would be the same. Like I said in the previous response, work this out together. I think that is the only possible cause. I've said this throughout the conversation. Short of conflict, the only way possible is to sit together and solve that issue. Now, whether the mechanism of sitting together involves third-party mediation or back channels between the two countries, that's for the countries to decide. But there is no other option purely from the lens of statecraft, and Dr. Ahmed might know better with regards to technical issues, and what India can or cannot do and what Pakistan can do.
Dr. Ahmed?
Yeah.
Are
Yeah,
you?
I had this really brilliant idea that I really wanted to discuss and just float it away. I guess that's part of being an academic and a researcher and part of being awake at a bit late in the evening. So I'll just chalk it off to that. And if I remember after the fact, I will just text you, oh, Waris, that's something I really wanted to say.
That's also
So
not
yeah, it just
only the problem with
literally
academics, that's
slipped
a
my
problem
mind.
with brilliant ideas as well. They come and they go.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's
but
true.
thank you very
So
much,
yeah,
both of you, for taking your time out. It's late, obviously, in Pakistan. And Mubashir still has evening to catch, but in Pakistan it's now 10. So I'll be thanking you guys, both of you, and I'll end the show here. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for having
thank you
us.
so much, Waris. Thank you.